Hey, welcome to the Tales of a Gearhead podcast. I'm your host, Stacey David. This podcast is brought to you by LMC Truck. Keep them on the road is their slogan, and they supply the parts to help you do that. Also, Cornwell Tools, the choice of professionals, and hot rods and enthusiasts alike. If you want quality tools, Cornwell's the place to go. Let's get to it. All right, I've got a question here from Dennis and John. Dennis and John are a father-son duo, and they have been watching me ever since the truck days. That's awesome. He said, Stacey, what we want to ask you is my son and I looked for exactly what you did with the Scrambler on your current shows. He said they started looking this spring, and they've continued during the quarantine. His son is 17, and we thought it would be something great to do together. Man, that is a great thing to do with your son, man. He says, we do not have a lift in our barn, but we do have jack stands. So the Level 2 project is exactly what we're looking to do. And then he goes on, he says, besides being jealous of what you found with that Scrambler, how did you find that kind of a barn find? Are they published? Is there anywhere you would suggest to find something similar in a CJ7 or a CJ8 project? Thank you, and any help you can give us would be greatly appreciated. All right, there's several questions here. Let's jump into this. First of all, to bring everybody up to date what you're saying, a Level 2 project is perfect for what you want to do. Now, a Level 2, just to remind everybody, is a cosmetic and mechanical restoration. So it is basically taking a vehicle like a Jeep and returning it back, rebuilding the original engine, maybe repainting it, doing the interior. It can be a complete restoration, but it is not a frame off. That gets up into a Level 4. And it is not a resto mod. That's not putting a V8 in it or something. That's a Level 3. So a Level 2, you're keeping things basically stock. If you put, for example, if you took a Jeep and you pulled out the 258 straight six in it and put a 304 V8 that came in those Jeeps, I would still consider that a Level 2 because you're putting parts back in there that originally came on the vehicle. So they're easy to find. It's easy to find manuals and stuff that will help you. And that's kind of the reason I positioned these Level 1s, 2s, and 3s the way I did, is that as long as you're staying within the parameters of what that vehicle might have had from the factory, you can find somebody that can help you. Once you start getting into resto mod and you start dropping in different engines and suspensions and getting into frame offs and custom builds, it starts to be you alone. In other words, there's not a lot of people you can call and say, hey man, I'm having a problem with this thing. They're like, dude, I can't help you because every Jeep I've ever seen has this engine or these axles or whatever. Okay, so a Level 2 is a great project. You don't really need to have a lift to do a Level 2. You can do this. You have stands and jack stands, so you're good to go on that. As far as the barn find, first of all, the Scrambler he's talking about, that belonged to a family member of mine, so I knew about that vehicle. So that is a place where you can find a lot of these barn finds. Friends, family, absolutely. I check, eBay, I check Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, as well as I have a whole network of people that have cars and vehicles and that I'm always looking for. So that's a place to find them. Now, just so we're all on the same page here on what a barn find is, that's become a big term that everybody's been throwing around lately the last few years. And it doesn't necessarily mean you find something in a barn. Even though this Scrambler that I rolled in here, we actually did pull that out of a barn with all the rats and the mice and the snake skins that were in it. Generally, a barn is not where you want to find something. What you're finding now, what is considered a barn find, is something that has been neglected or sat for a while, usually in a garage. It can be in a garage, it can be in a carport, it can be in a barn, it can be out in a field. All of that comes under the name barn find now. Keep in mind, anything, once you set a vehicle aside for 2 or 3 years and it doesn't run, it kind of goes into the place of a barn find because you can't just jump into it and turn the key and drive it. You kind of have to go through some wiring, you have to go through the fuel system, you have to start going into some restoration stuff. And the longer it's sat, the more deteriorated, the more of a restoration project it becomes. So when Dennis and John say they're looking for a barn find, that's what they're looking for. Now, having said that, there are different levels of barn find. And this is where you have to be careful. You have to make sure you find something that's in your skill level, because especially now we're getting back, you want a CJ7, CJ8, we'll deal with that in just a minute. But you can find a Jeep pretty easy for $500, rusted into nothing. Now, if you have the skills to fix that, great. But if you don't, walk on, go on to the next project. Just because you find a barn find and it looks good on the outside and the paint's yellow, it doesn't mean it's not a money trap, especially if you don't have the skills and the time and the place to do it. For example, I picked up a '65 Mustang coupe the other day for $500. And a friend of mine told me about it. He knew about it. And what had happened, the guy that had the car had bought 2 Mustangs, and this was a parts car. But it was in too nice a shape for him to pull any parts off, so it just sat out under a carport. And it was virtually rust-free, loaded with field mice. The seats had been eaten up and everything, but the basic structure was there. So I knew as just a body, it was in good shape. So I took it in, I cleaned it up, got it all to where, got rid of the old nasty carpet so somebody could really see what they were getting. And then I turned and sold it to a friend of mine. And because I wasn't going to build it, but they were able to see what they had. So those sort of deals are out there. And they don't go for a lot of money as long as you know what kind of work needs to happen and that you know what your skill level is. Now, had this Mustang have been pristine and no rust at all and no rat poop all over it and wires all eaten, obviously it would have brought more money than that. So you have to kind of know what the value of these things are and what you're willing to give and what kind of time you're going to put into them. Now, talking about a CJ7, CJ8, you're going to have trouble finding a scrambler. That's a CJ8. Those are hard to find. And when you do find them, they are usually rusty. And they're expensive because they were rare. So I would suggest going with a CJ7. You can find those good night. I mean, go on any of these places. You can find a ton of CJ7s. Once again, they're going to be pretty rusty. Now, the good thing about a Jeep project, you can either fix the body or you can buy a brand new metal body from a place like Omix Ada or Quadratech or places like that. I mean, a complete replacement body is about $3,500, $4,000. So you'll put that into that repairing the old body. So that's one of the unique things about a Jeep. You can also get fiberglass bodies for much cheaper than that, but I'm not much into the fiberglass thing. So that's personal preference, though. The fiberglass bodies are good. If you're into that, you can do that even cheaper, $1,000, something like that. But anyway, so I would suggest a CJ7. Look around for it. You'll have a ball putting it together. They're not expensive to restore, and it'll be a great project for you guys. Good luck to you. You know, you hear me talk about tools a lot, and there's a reason for that. Because we couldn't do what we do as car guys without tools. And we always need quality tools. And I always encourage people to find the best quality tool that you can. And for me, you know, after years of doing this, decades now, I haven't found anybody better than Cornwell Tools. And there's a, you know, they've been in business for 100 years. So obviously they know what they're doing. They continue to push forward in their tools and their boxes. They continue to push forward in new technology. I'm always eager to see what they come out with, and I will recommend them many times to you guys. There is a difference between buying something American and buying something that's an overseas imitation. And you guys that are car guys and tool guys, you know what I'm talking about. So check them out, Cornwell Tools. You won't be disappointed. This is a question that comes from Tim, and Tim has been watching the Scrambler build that we're doing on the show, and he has got a 79 CJ7 Golden Eagle. Ooh, that's a nice rig there, man. Always love those things. And he's asking about the 258 motor that I got from S&J Remanufactured Motors. He says he's thinking about doing it. He's seen good and bad reviews. He just needs to know if I think S&J Motors is a good motor to use on this. It's like, well, Tim, the reason I use them is because I think they're good. Now, I've had no trouble at all. I have nothing bad to say about them. I thought their price was reasonable. The motor's everything it's supposed to be. So at this point, yeah, I think they're definitely worth it. When you look at some of those negative reviews, dig into it. You have to dig a little deeper than a person just saying a person's product sucks. kind of find out, did they order the right part? Did they install it properly? Is it about service or is it about the product? You know, those kind of things. But if I had anything bad to say about them, I definitely would, and I don't. So I definitely suggest using them. I did. Good luck to you, man. It's a great project. All right, this question comes from Carlos. Carlos is working on a 72 Ford F100. He said it's complete and original, only has 71,000 miles on it. That's awesome, man. He says, now the problem. He says the cab has cancer all the way around the drip rail and upper door frame corners. And he says, ironically, the floor is in good shape. In this case, should I look for a donor or try to work out the metal little by little? Good question, Carlos. That's not uncommon for those vehicles to start rusting up around those drip rails. Usually they have it down on the floor too, but I've seen them all eaten up in the cab as well. You have an interesting dilemma here because I don't know what your skill level is. The fact that you say work it out little by little means that you probably haven't done a lot of metal work. And unfortunately, about the easiest metal work you can do is floors, and about the most difficult is upper cab. And the reason being, if you look at that cab, it tapers a couple of different directions. Not only does it taper from the sides, but it tapers front and rear, and then it has a crown across the top. These are all graduating surfaces, which means that takes some skill to match that stuff up. Basically what you're going to run into, if you cut that drip rail off, that whole roof is actually spot welded on there. That drip rail, I believe on that truck, is the flange where they put the spot welds. So when you cut that off, you're going to have some metal missing there, and you're going to have to contour it and fit it in there if you're going to do it right, which I definitely expect you to do. That could be very time consuming and very expensive if you don't know how to do it. Personally, from what it sounds like, I'd look for another truck. If it was floors and you're just learning to do some metal work, I'd say do that. But that upper area, like I said, you're almost getting into fitting if you were doing a top chop, angling doors and the top of the cab. That's pretty advanced metal work. So I would suggest using that as your donor and then picking up another cab and then using parts off of that. Hope that helps, man. Good luck to you. It's a good body style. You know, one of the big challenges that faces restorers out there today is finding good quality original parts. And there's a lot of places out there that carry custom parts, but finding those original parts can be very difficult. And that's one of the reasons you hear me talk about LMC Truck all the time. Because if you're doing a truck project, Ford, Chevy, Dodge, doesn't matter what year, they carry everything, they have got the parts, those little screws and those nuts and those little fasteners that you can't find anywhere, you can find at LMC. So if you have a project, even if you're not working on a truck, but you might need some hardware or something, you know, that is Ford, Chevy, or Dodge related, you need to have an LMC catalog because I guarantee you, they got something that you can use. All right, this next question comes from Dawn and Dave, and they have a very common problem. They say, good morning. She said, my husband has a 1980 Firebird, and he's changed the motor to a Chevy 383 stroker. Okay, that's common. That happens all the time. She said the problem is the hood scoop, the shaker hood scoop, which is what made those cars so cool, no longer fits as the air intake sits too high. What can be done to modify it? Oh, that problem has happened to every person that's owned a Trans Am or Firebird, anything with a shaker hood, even the Mopars. Okay, let me just explain to you how the shakers work for people that don't understand it. The shaker hood scoop is actually, the scoop sits on the engine. It's actually bolted to the engine, and then the hood just has a big hole in it. And there's a piece of rubber that seals around the scoop. And when you shut the hood goes down over the scoop, and then the scoop sits there and shakes with the engine as you're driving down the road. So when you stomp on the gas, you see the scoop kick to the side, and it's super cool. But that's where the name shaker comes from, because it sits there and shakes. And I think the first ones that did it, I know Ford had one in like '69 on the Mustang, but obviously Mopar with the Cudas it was very popular. And then, of course, the Pontiac Trans Am continued it all through the 70s. Okay, back to your problem here. You're exactly right. What has happened is, I would think that it's a Chevy 383 stroker. You probably have a dual plane intake on that, an aluminum dual plane intake, and it just sits too high. The thing that was unique about the shaker scoop on the Pontiacs was that it was designed to fit on that engine with that particular intake manifold and that particular carburetor. So all those tolerances and all those distances were specific to that engine. Obviously you've changed that, and so now we've got to go in and try to fix the problem. Okay, I would guess that on that Chevy 383 you probably have a dual plane aluminum intake. It's not a high-rise intake, but it is higher than the stock Pontiac intake. So one way to fix that is you can find just a regular 4-barrel intake, probably a cast iron one, something that's very low profile. That will drop your carburetor down a few inches, and it may give you the clearance that you need, and you can just mount it on there. If that doesn't do it, another option is to try to modify the base plate on the scoop and have it sit lower down on the carburetor. I don't know what your fabrication skills are. I had to do that on the Copperhead project. When I put that scoop on there, it sat about 4 inches too high. And I had to get real creative and basically created a scoop where the carburetor fit all the way up into the top of the scoop to get me room to put that scoop under the hood. So you do have a few inches to work with on that as well. Now, another option, I've seen a lot of guys do this, to varying degrees of success. You can take that scoop and make it not a shaker anymore, and you can fiberglass it into the hood. And you could either fiberglass it flush, or you can set it up on top and glass it in if you need a few more inches. If you do the work right, it actually looks really good. The only thing you lose is that depth and the whole shaking thing, but you'll pick up 2 or 3 inches of clearance easily by just glassing the scoop into the hood. That will be the only, if you want to keep that 383 with the intake and stuff that you've got, that's probably going to be your only option. And like I said, you can search a lot of websites and stuff. You'll see people that have done it. And like I said, if you do the work right, it just looks like a scoop on the hood. So you have some options there. None of them are too expensive, just a little time consuming. So good luck to you. Hope to see that car out on the road. Keep in mind, this podcast is made possible by our friends at LMC Truck and our friends at Cornwell Tools. All right, that wraps it up for us today. It is time for you to get out there, start working on something, build something with your own 2 hands, send in your questions, send in your pictures, let us know what you're working on. All right, we'll see you later.